So we're in Genesis week 5 this week, and I wrote the question up here, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I could have had some why did the chicken cross the road humor for you too, but decided I'll save that for another day. Actually could have had this, I believe it's next week, we'll look at the animals. But it's a good question because of what we're going to study this morning. And I wanted us to look at two verses. Now I have Luke 18:27. In fact, I'll read both those. We have some other verses that we'll do later. Let me hand those around. But I wanted us to start with two verses that mean a lot to me and actually have a lot of application in today's lesson and the lessons that are coming. Luke 18:27, and I'm reading out of NASB, the only authorized version of the Bible, I might add. But he said, this is Christ speaking, but he said, the things that are impossible with people are possible with God. And then the Matthew verse, I don't even have to read to you, that's all things are possible with God. So but we need two pieces of scripture we need to keep in mind this morning. One is this one, those things that are impossible with man are possible with God. And the other is the verse in I think it's Jeremiah, might be Isaiah. Your ways are not my ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. God doesn't think like us. He doesn't do things the way we do things. So part of the problem that we have, part of the challenge we have in looking at the creation story then is God does things differently than we would expect, and we try to explain it in ways that make sense to us. And that's not necessarily going to work out very well. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? So what came first? Seriously, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Chicken.
The chicken had to. In fact, we're hoping the chicken came with an egg or two. And we're going to see this played out this morning as we look at the verses for today. So let's go ahead and turn over to the book of Genesis. Yes, we'll be in chapter 1. I had Ray asked me this morning how long we will be in chapter 1. A couple more weeks yet. But once we leave chapter 1 and 2, we get past the fall, we'll move along fairly quickly for a while, particularly when we get to the chronology. The week that we have the chronology, I'm going to ask Lori to read that passage for us. Somebody had me read that one time, and so somebody had me read that one time, and so I just changed all the names in there to Smith, Jones, Watson, John Doe. But we're going to spend a good 2 or 3 more lessons in creation because it sets the foundation for everything in the Bible. So we're in Genesis, and let me just read the passage we're going to cover this morning first, beginning in verse 9. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. And he made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and morning, a 4th day. And so we see a couple of things happening right away that you wouldn't expect. We have vegetation on the earth before we have the sun. We have vegetation on the earth that comes with its own seed, and in fact we have full-blown fruit-bearing trees on the earth before there's even the stars in the sky. So God thinks a little differently. Another thing to consider, you go back prior to creation, you're God for a moment, scary thought I know, and you decide you're going to create man. Notice that man is the last thing, man and woman are the last thing God creates, because he's building this home for man to begin with. And we've already had, we had the void, and then we had the rotation of the earth gave us the night and day. The light came from energizing the elements that God had created. And then a week or so back, you all had looked at the separation of the waters and how we got heavens and space and all of that. And now we have the separation of water from land. Maybe the earth spinning so fast the water drew off. I don't know. We're going to look at that this morning a little bit, is how long that process took. But we have dry land, we have the oceans. Then the next thing we don't have the sun and the moon. The next thing we have is vegetation. Then we have the sun, the moon, and the stars put in place. And then next week he'll begin to create some things again. And you'll note too, as we've seen in others, more than one thing is being created in this day. And it's all being spoken into, it's coming from the elements that he had started in the beginning and being spoken into existence. So with that as a backdrop, let's look then at our questions today. And question one was, what an awesome scene it must have been on the third day when God commanded the separation of dry land from the waters and the seas were created. How long did this process take? And there was silence on the land.
So it happened on the third day.
It happened on the third day, right. Yeah, so it doesn't tell us it took exactly 3 minutes or, less than 24 hours, a lot less than 24 hours. First of all, nothing gets done at night, so you've only got a 12-hour day. Okay, and then what happened after the waters and the land were separated? A whole list of other things God created all in that day. So this separation of water and land was very quick. This isn't another one of these 10,000 years and the water made the Rio and all of those things, which are probably post-flood anyway. But this was a moment in time, probably. It would have had to happen very quickly, because separating the land from the water is pretty minor compared to putting all that stuff in the universe out there, not to mention all the vegetation and things. So it's not a specific time given, but we know that it was fairly quickly and not something that took a lengthy process. And Genesis 1:11-13. So let's read that again for a moment. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. It was evening and morning, the third day. So all these other things got created then. And so the question I had, what got created? We had vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees bearing fruit. Sounds good. So the trees bearing fruit thing comes to mind pretty readily. Bananas, or pick something, nuts, apples, oranges, peaches, tomatoes.
Papaya, avocado.
Tomatoes are fruit, right?
Mango. They're not on trees.
Oh, aha, very good. That's one of the things everybody can. The tomato tree, that's right. Money. Oh, there was money trees, probably money trees. Yeah, trees going.
Those become extinct or something?
Yeah. Post flood, they're gone. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So fruit bearing trees, we get that. Seed bearing, what's it say? Plants. Let's try this again. God created plants and trees. Vegetation, seed-bearing plants. Seed-bearing plants.
Roses, daisies, sunflowers.
Those would be flower-bearing plants.
No, they make seeds.
Okay, that's not where I'm going though. Seed-bearing plant. You can't eat roses.
Nuts.
Wheat. Yeah, exactly. The grains. Yeah, the grains. Corn, wheat, rice, so on. Why is this important in the garden? I mean, obviously man needs food, but why is this?
Because it's a
A good one. You got to have it to make beer.
reproduce.
Because what was the diet in the garden?
Oh, it was It was vegetation. It was a.
They were vegetarians. When was the first time man ate meat? After the fall?
No.
Eh.
No.
After the what? After the flood. And when we get to the flood story, we will see that. Prior to the flood, which is way down the road from where we are today, they were vegetarians. Besides man, what else was vegetarian? All of the animals. So all these dinosaurs ripping people's heads off and all of that stuff, later, maybe, post-flood. None of that would have happened prior to the flood. Everything ate vegetables. So it's okay for man to have a coconut and a banana, but that isn't going to help the birds much, is it? So we better have some seed-bearing stuff also. So this is the food supply he's putting in place for everything that's going to be habitable on the planet. And he's clearly thought of all of it, including trees and shade-bearing things and all of that sort of stuff is all getting put in place now before he puts anything else on the earth. Because the next thing, does anybody know what the next thing is? Anybody read ahead 1 week? Yeah, fish in the sea and birds in the air. Birds in the air can't eat anything if we don't have food for them first. So this is where all the food supply for the world is getting sort of populated, if you will, before any living creature enters the creation. Okay. In addition to vegetation, God created plants and trees with some things in common. Oh yeah, so, right. And actually, Nanette was hitting on it. In addition to vegetation, God created the plants and trees with some common things. What are they? What are all three of these? What does it say about all three of them? Seeds. Yeah. Yeah. This is the chicken egg thing. They came with the ability to reproduce. And the second thing they had in common, it was the seeds according to their own kind. So this goes to the comment I had last week. I don't think a human's given birth to a baby giraffe anytime lately, and you've never gotten a tomato off a banana plant. It's to their own kind. In fact, speaking of seeds for a minute, I'll digress with a seed story. Anybody ever live in Hawaii or the tropics, out in one of the islands or anything? Papaya? Are you familiar with papaya? You've all seen papaya. You know how it grows? Really cool. Papaya is like this long-looking, I don't know how you describe it other than it's a papaya. Long-looking thing. When you go to eat it, typically what they do is they'll slice it through the middle, and then inside is all this stuff like you find in cantaloupe, but seeds and whatnot. They scoop all that junk out, and then you eat papaya. If you want to grow a papaya, now you got to be in the tropics. You got to have the right conditions. But if you want to grow a papaya tree, you slice that thing in half, and you take the one half, leave the seeds in it. You dig an earthen bowl that's probably not much deeper than the fruit itself, a couple of inches down, and about 2 feet wide. Just this earthen bowl about that deep around there. Pile a little dirt in the middle. Put the papaya open, face up, down there, cover it up, and let it go. And within some period of time, all those seeds feed off the papaya and start sprouting new vegetation. So then as a farmer, what you do, this is, I'm sure commercially it's much more involved, but growing one at home, you go out in your backyard every couple of weeks and you pull sprouts out, leaving the tallest ones there. So if you've got 14 or 15 the first week, you pull 3 or 4 and leave the tall 10 or 11. And you keep working down till you have 1 or 2 left. This is like the X Factor. Everybody gets voted off the island till you get to the survival of the fittest, and the biggest guy by that time is probably this high. That's going to be your tree. And within, I think, 22 to 24 months, you will have a fruit-bearing tree that's grown out of that papaya. One more example, fruit-bearing, bringing your own stuff. Anybody ever grown their own pineapple? Good. We have 2 knobs in the back for those that can't see it on the video. So pineapple, very similar kind of experience. You go to the store and get one, you get this green thing up here, which, by the way, if you're going to the store in the U.S. and buying a pineapple, it's not near the same as being over in Hawaii or somewhere in the Pacific where they grow fresh. It's a whole different experience. But in any case, you got this,
Green stuff.
yeah, a pineapple field looks like a field of cactus because all those green things are just packed in there solid. Now picture this. We're living on Maui, working on the volcano. People would go to the volcano, which is about 10,000 feet up, in their hang gliders and go off, come down the valley floor. If you're short, you come face first right through all the pineapple fields. Oh, it just rip you to shreds. Very, very sharp. So here's what happens. You lob the top of the pineapple off, and so you're going to have a little bit of pineapple there and that big green thing. You plop the pineapple part, not the green thing, the pineapple part in dirt, the right mixture of magnesium and a whole bunch of other stuff, but you plop it in dirt and just water that puppy. And eventually what happens is that green thing becomes a bush. And over on one side or the other, that little green thing, a little hand grenade will pop up. And then another one will pop up over here, and you'll have two little hand grenades that will eventually grow into two full-size pineapples. You harvest those, you keep the plant going, you'll get 4. After you get 4, you're done. Or it's 1 a minute, it's 2. I can't remember. The plant doubles every season, and it's another about a 22-month season. When they get too many, you end up with almost looks like a, what do you call those, a fish people. It looks like you've got webbing between your fingers. The pineapple will be about that thick if you look at it from the side, and there'll be like 9 of them. You know, it's way overproducing. So after they do two harvests, it all gets dug up, and they put all new crowns back in, and you start the whole process all over again. But it's the same thing. The pineapple comes with the ability to reproduce itself. Papaya reproduces itself, and so on. And so we see that here as well. Seed of its kind. Not seed evolving into something else, seed of its kind. And that's a common principle with God all through his creation. He's very orderly about it. The news yesterday, I think it was. Anybody see the baby gorilla? Baby gorilla in the news? No? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You live a sheltered life. You should spend more time in the hospital waiting rooms. Somewhere, I don't know, stateside zoo or overseas or something, one of the few gorillas born in captivity, cute little guy. Oh my goodness, sucking his thumb, the whole thing, you know, Sherry's, oh, look at this cute little guy, look at this kid. What was God thinking? You never thought about that? When God created all of this, he could have created a black and white flat thing with stick people. No, we've got this variety of animals that's almost unbelievable, and you get into the insect world and microbiology and all the stuff under the sea, and wow, I mean, and God spoke all these things into existence. No wonder what's impossible for us is possible with him. If we study his creation, you get such an idea of the immenseness of God's power. It's incredible. And now I've wandered way off course, so let's get back on track here. So, yeah, how long did it take for the trees that God planted on day 3 to actually appear? To actually bear their first fruit? That is absolutely correct. And the answer is they were bearing fruit the moment they arrived. Consider the event. So here's another principle here. This is why we spend so much time on these individual things. So how old was the first apple-bearing fruit tree?
It was brand new that way.
That's right. It came mature. It wasn't a sapling that, you know, and that's another thing. Fruit trees, if you've ever done fruit trees, it's 3 years till you get the first decent fruit off a tree. And in fact, the first harvest off a tree, by the way, is its best. Which explains why God says, bring me the fruits of your first harvest and all that other stuff. We grew a mango tree one time. And that first mango off that brand new tree, I mean, it was about 3 years old when we got first fruit up, we never had anything that good afterwards. It's incredible, first fruit. But in any case, I digress again. The tree was mature and it already had fruit on it. I mean, this is a process that takes at least a season, and depending on, like I said, pineapple, I think it's every 22 months or something. These things occurred in an instant, spoken by God, in their mature state. We talked about this last week. Adam and Eve, they weren't an embryo and then they grew up and, oh, you're my wife and all. No, it didn't happen that way, in a mature state. So we get into a discussion about how old is the earth. I don't know how you tell that, to be honest with you. I know how we can make theories about it, but we don't know how old the earth was the moment it was created to begin with, because it would have been created in a mature state. It had to have been in order to sustain all this life and things that are going to be growing on it. All right. Considering the event recounted in Genesis 1:11-13, what proofs do we see that indicate to us that the theory of evolution is incorrect? Was anybody able to find out anything about that? What do we see in this story of day 3 that's directly counter to what the theory of evolution states?
All the snails came as themselves. They didn't evolve from something else.
Yep.
They came as what they are.
That's true. Yeah. So what I wrote down here is there are 2 fundamental issues which surface relative to the theory of evolution on day 3. The first of these is that there is no sun, moon, or stars have been created yet to kick off the cellular process that evolution says you need. Because that's their thing. The cellular process started by the rays of the sun energizing the ooze and all of this business. We didn't have any sun yet, and yet here we had living things. In fact, no life form had yet been seen on the new earth. And secondly, we know that fruit-bearing trees and seed-bearing plants require pollination. But there's no insect, bees, or anything been created yet. So these things were created mature and in place. Now, the Lord will take care of the pollination thing the next day. But these came with the fruit-bearing to start with. Nevertheless, we observe that fruit-bearing trees were already in existence. If life began as a cell and evolved over time, bees and etc. would have to have been created first in order to start the fruit and plant growing cycle. Evolution has the cycle as animal first and then vegetation, which is opposite the biblical account. So the whole order of things that God did, and we're going to see when it creates animals and things, big to little, where evolution says it started little and went big. God's process is completely different from man's all through the description of the first 6 days. Further to our discussion regarding evolution versus day 3 events described in Genesis 1:11-13, how do the events described in the following passages relate to or support the Genesis account? So if someone has 1 Corinthians 15:38-39.
I do.
Okay.
But God gives it a body just as he wished, and to each of the seeds a body of his own. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of men, and another flesh of beasts, and another flesh of birds, and another of fish.
Right. So God's approach is distinct orders of beings, nothing all mixed in together. And then in Leviticus, I gave someone Leviticus 11:13-32. Yeah, I know it's a long passage, but
It's part of a longer passage, instructions to the people of clean and unclean food. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, and then he goes into detail.
yeah.
These are the birds you are to detest and not eat because they are detestable. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hopi, and the bat. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat, those that have joined legs for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper.
Boy, I'm getting hungry already. In chocolate. In chocolate. Georgia, bring the beer.
But all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. Every animal that has a split hoof, not completely divided, or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean till evening. They are unclean for you. Of the animals that move about on the ground, these are unclean for you: the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Of all those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it is made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water, it will be unclean until evening, and then it will be clean.
So again, for those watching at home, that was Leviticus 11, 13 through 32, and it appears to be, well, it is God's instruction to what's clean and unclean. As you listen to that list, is there anything in there that where you think that animal was a mistake and God didn't intend to create it? Didn't it sound like God knew exactly what he was talking about all through that list? I mean, we get caught up in the, who'd want to eat weasel anyway, and the things that are clean and unclean. But what strikes me there, just like when you're reading in Job and God's talking about creation, it didn't sound like God was confused or, those guys were a mistake. Don't touch those animals. They evolved from something else. No. And in fact, you'll notice that when God went through the list, he had categories of things: those that crawl on the ground, those that walk on their paws, those that very orderly, very organized by their specific kind. We're not an accident. We didn't come together out of ooze. God knew exactly what he was creating before he created it. And it's no different with the plant life and the trees and things that we've seen planted today. The evolution thing just doesn't work. But more importantly, when we're faced with a challenge, when there's struggles at home or at work or the government shuts down, we need to remember this, that God's not a God of chaos and coincidence and accident. He's all-powerful God. There is nothing that is impossible for him. And if he's gotten you to this point, he's going to get you to the next point. One of the things that's always surprises us, I'm sure you've had the same experience I have, is to read how the Jews would have their backs to the wall. God would perform a miracle, an obvious miracle, divide the Red Sea or whatever it is, and then the very next time that they had their backs to the wall, they would just fall apart like, now what are we going to do? We have no hope. And in fact, they got to the point in the Promised Land where they didn't even want God as the king. They wanted a king. Oh no, God, we need a king. We gotta watch we don't fall into that. And one of the things that helps Sherry and I when we're struggling with something is to remember back when we had some other struggle and God miraculously stepped in. Or what we thought was going to be the end of the world really wasn't. It was God taking us in a new direction or so on. Very important to remember. One of the things that just strikes you as you study the creation is how powerful God is. And then Christ, of course, is God in the flesh. And Christ comes along, and what happens? He can calm the ocean. Can you imagine being able to speak and the waves just flatten? Wow. Man. Okay, last question. List the specific purposes given by God for creating the sun, moon, and the stars. And so we have 4 of those. Let's go ahead. I'm going to put those up here. I apologize. I'll have my back to the camera. But so first one is wanted to separate day from night. So right away, well, wait a minute. This must mean God wants us to know the difference between day and night. If you've ever lived in Alaska, when there isn't much difference, this is really handy. Trust me, it really messes with you physically. If you've ever been up there, I worked on the Arctic Circle for a year, and you have these periods of time where there's almost constant sun. It kind of sets at 2 in the morning, and by 3:30 it's back up again, that kind of thing. you get disoriented horribly. And then I was working like a swing shift, and I'd get off at midnight, and we would go eat at the mess hall and then go out and play softball. And you got to where you'd wake up, you didn't know, now, did I just get off work, or am I supposed to be going to work? And then you had the reverse problem, similar effect, no sun. Well, is it 4 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning? It just really messes with you. So separating the day from night, that's a good one. Okay, second one. What was the second one? Mark the seasons. Mark the seasons. In fact, I think my note says seasons, days, and years. Now, this is interesting. This is before the flood. This is before the fall of man. This is at the very beginning of creation. He wanted us to be able to do this. Calendars aren't post-diluvian. God wanted us to know the seasons. There were going to be seasons and days and years and so on. The third one says light, correct. Light to illuminate the earth. We need light. Bad things happen in dark. We need light. The other thing, however, of course, we need night because we need rest. Unlike God, or unlike what our bodies will be in the new city of Jerusalem and the new heaven and earth, we won't need dark. We won't need the sun. We'll have the light of God, and we don't need sleep then. Boy, you can do a lot of house cleaning. And then the fourth thing was basically the sun was going to govern the day, and the moon govern the night. And I think, didn't it say something about the stars are also going to provide light?
It says he also made the stars.
And so was lesser. Oh, and he also made the stars. Okay. Because I was going to ask you that question too. I don't know if you've ever gotten to experience it. Working on the volcano, we were at 10,000 feet and close to the equator. We had 3 less atmospheres to look through with the telescope, but with the naked eye even. When there's no moon and it's pitch black, first of all, it's black. When there's stars out, they're brilliant. When the Milky Way would come out, I mean, you almost needed sunglasses. It's incredible in a pitch black environment, even the light from a distant star, how bright it is. Well, boy, there's sermons like crazy in that message. Because in a dark world, even our little candle shines very brightly. Anyway, I digress again. So now what I wanted you to see here, the reason I wrote these up here, how let's just take Adam and Eve for a second. How would Adam and Eve use this? How would they know these things? See if I can get to the point I'm trying to make. As an odd question. But God says to you, okay, I've put these things in place so that you can know a day, a year, seasons. How would they know seasons and things? How would they know a year? Before we had calendars, how did they know a year had gone by?
Changes in where they were living, changes in the plants and things.
Well, a little bit, but it'd be tough to tell a year from that. They studied what? They studied the stars. Yeah. Now, astrology gets a bad rap, as it ought to, because it's gone way off the deep end and it looks at the stars and then does all this other stuff. So we'll stick with astronomy. They're put there for us to look at. It isn't that God didn't want us to understand the universe outside of here. There was a use for it, and he wanted us to use it for that purpose. It's okay to figure out Mars is going past Jupiter and, all the stuff that they look at in space and whatnot. But in the early days, that was one of the ways you told harvest time and all that was how many moons from the last full moon, and, they started tracking days by various events. Now, when Adam and Eve were in the garden, it would have been more interesting. I'd love to know how they knew seasons. Because what was the problem with seasons in the garden?
Nothing changes.
Nothing changes, yeah. Yeah, and that's a little odd too, by the way. If you've ever been in that environment, which we lived there as well, Hawaii has kind of that. The season is pretty much the same all the time. So I would go out and I'd put a marigold plants along the driveway. Oh, it's spring, it's April. Marigold plants are available. I'm going to put marigold plants out. They're cute little things. By November, they look like this ugly, it's this big, long, gangly bush with seedy-looking flowers dangling off the end of it, because they're not supposed to live that long. They need the seasons. We need the changes. So I don't know what the seasons part was in the garden. Maybe they measured it by when the banana fell off the tree, and then the next time a banana popped up or something. 22 months later is the season. I don't know. But clearly what this shows us is that God wanted us to use these as tools. He wanted a separation of day from night. We're not supposed to be active 24 hours a day. God's activities were all at day. Now that's not to knock people who have to work night shifts, but we're meant, the farmers had it right. You get up when the sun comes up and you go to bed when the sun goes down. You know, that sort of approach. And then he wanted us to be able to tell the seasons and tell the years and keep track of time, if you will. Because what's his instruction? We're not there yet, but I know you guys know this. What was his instruction to Adam and Eve about the garden? Just in general. Take care of it. To cultivate it. And it was a garden that needed care. Interestingly enough, which we'll talk about when we get to Adam and Eve, because that's kind of an odd comment too. If the garden's perfect, why would it need care?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that. But if they were to cultivate it, so you better know when the banana tree is going to bud and when the apple tree is going to need to be harvested, and you know, all those sorts of things. Because one common thing about man is that mankind, we were created with a purpose, and we were created for work. We need it. Now, as we get older, we need a lot less of it, but we need to have I mean, even folks who are retired will tell you that you need a purpose for getting up every day. We were created that way. And he wanted us to be able to use these things to help with that purpose. So there's nothing wrong with astronomy. I would stay away from astrology. But astronomy is pretty cool, having looked through some of the bigger telescopes in the world.
We used to have a cartoon in our computer lab. The first frame, the student asks what's the difference between astronomy and astrology. The second frame, the professor says math, lots and lots of math.
Lots of math. That's a good one.
The third frame, the classroom's empty except for the professor.
That's a good one. Speaking of math, I remember my very first college class was Accounting 101. And I don't know, there had to have been 45, 50 people in there. And the professor walks on the dais, you know, and we're all up in these kinds of seats. And he says, so I want to welcome you to the class with the highest dropout rate. My heart sunk. I thought, golly, I thought I was really going to enjoy this. I wanted to get a degree in this, and now this guy's telling me it's a high dropout rate, or attrition rate. That's what it was, highest attrition rate. And after class, I walked up to him and said, I'm concerned. I've gotten in a class I shouldn't be in. And he talked with me for a minute. He says, oh, no. He says, you'll do fine. He says, what I meant by that is you're going to find out. And he was right. A lot of freshmen go to college and they have to take electives. Oh, Accounting 101, that's how to keep your checkbook. You know, and they'll sign up thinking it's an easy class, and by the third week, they're dropping out like flies. And sure enough, I think there was like 12 or 13 of us in the class when it got over. Because the math, it's not math like Mike's referring to, but you have to have such a twisted brain to be an accountant that a lot of people go, no, I don't need that. All right, well, I think with that, we're going to close with the word of prayer. Thank you for being here this week. Yeah, next week's the fish in the sea and all sorts of things.